If you are following the tabletop RPG hobby, then you probably have heard about the OSR movement. In case you have not, OSR stands for Old School Renaissance, a movement that strives to bring back the old school playstyle of the early D&D incarnations. This trend is popular nowadays, and you can find many retro clone systems, publications and blogs out there. In this video I'm going to explain how and why OSR can be useful for GURPS games, and why I like OSR, and is GURPS old school or not? First things first, I am young, I'm only 31 years old, and my introduction to the tabletop RPG hobby happened back in 2003 with D&D 3.0. This has somewhat tainted my perception of how RPGs should be played, and it took me a while to shift gears. For many years I have been playing D&D 3.5 and Pathfinder, but the more I did so, the more I grew disillusioned with the systems. They just did not support the style of game I wanted to play. There were many rules, but it felt that they constrain you instead of enabling you to do more. Eventually, I switched to GURPS and found it to be a perfect system for me. How is it related to OSR? OSR is not a playstyle, not a rule set, but it's both. You cannot play an old-school game using a system that does not support that kind of playstyle, and GURPS very much does. Let's take a look at what probably should be the first document you have to read to get what old-school playstyle is. A quick primer for old-school gaming by Matthew Finch. It's free, and I linked it in the description if you'd like to take a look. The most important part, in my opinion, is the 4 Zen moments. The first Zen moment is rulings, not rules. Modern games constrain you with rules. The example given in the document is a simple pit trap. In D&D 3.5 you would have to make a disabled device roll to avoid it, and that's it. And probably only a rogue can do it, because he has a trap finding class feature. In an old school game, the GM would ask the players how they would like to circumvent the trap, and if the proposed solution makes sense, then, for example, he could demand or make a roll to see if the character pulled it off properly, or just let the character circumvent the trap without any rolls at all. Everything is based on common sense, and dice are rolled only if a certain element of randomness can affect the outcome. Quoting the document, rules are a resource for the referee, not for the players. Players use observation and description as their tools and resources. Rules are for the referee only. And GURPS definitely supports that kind of gameplay, since it is grounded in reality. You can run a game for complete newbies to the system, and let them simply use descriptive language for their actions. You, as a GM, will translate it into the language of rules and make all necessary rolls. GURPS has an extensive rule set that can cover almost any action imaginable, so translating normal language to rules shouldn't be difficult. But here you might say, but this is not a ruling, this is a rule. And here I would like to quote Peter Del Orto. Rulings are just rules you didn't know until they came up in play. GURPS rules, to me, feel more like a collection of rulings than a definitive rule set. If you don't like what the book says, you can do it differently, just use the common sense. That's why as a player I try not to be a rules lawyer. When I see the GM resolve something not by the book, I accept it. At least most of the times, because old habits die hard. The skill system of GURPS lets anyone attempt almost anything. GURPS enables you to do things, not restricts you. The second Zen moment is player skill, not character abilities. This is where GURPS is not very old school. You do have to rely on abilities of your character, and advantages and disadvantages that you take dictate how you should roleplay your character. Yes, you can remove all that from GURPS and make it more old school, but I think that it would make it less GURPS. The third Zen moment is heroic, not superhero. This is definitely something GURPS excels at, as by default it assumes a heroic, realistic playstyle. Things that are a threat to a real-world human are still a threat to a human in GURPS. The characters are not invincible, but if you want to, you can play a superhero game in GURPS too. The fourth Zen moment is forget game balance. This is one of the reasons I dropped D&D and Pathfinder. The game required you to tailor encounters and situations to the power level of the player characters. Once characters become powerful enough, it would make no sense to set them against the so-called weak enemies, but it would also make no sense to have them fight a monster they cannot possibly beat. I feel that this is exactly what caused it to feel more like a video game than a tabletop RPG. The game had to be adjusted to the power level of the player characters, or else it wouldn't work. As a side effect, it also made the game world much less believable, and for me personally, it made it hard to invest into the world and the characters. As a player, if I saw the GM set us against, for example, a war band of orcs, I would assume that we can defeat them. Things such as evaluating the threat level, thinking about how to engage the encounter, or whether we even have to engage it, just did not occur to me. It felt like a fight in a game world, not an adventure in a believable fantasy world. And GURPS works like that by default. It does not have anything like the challenge rating, and it relies on the players interacting with the world, not with the stat blocks. When I hear people tell me GURPS is not balanced, I reply, yes, I know, and I do not care. Game balance is overrated, it isn't necessary for an engaging story. With all that said, I have to mention that it is easy to use OSR content with GURPS. So, if you are a GURPS player, be sure to check out some OSR blogs and books. I'm sure you will be able to find something useful. What I like about OSR content is that it is easy to convert to GURPS because very often you do not even have to. For example, I have taken a one-page dungeon from one of the OSR blogs and simply ran it in GURPS as is. This is also why using AD&D monsters in GURPS is easier than using D&D 3.5 monsters. AD&D uses a more descriptive language that is easy to adapt, whereas D&D 3.5 has a proper stat block that is balanced against a certain power level. So, is GURPS old school? Judging by these 4 Zen moments, GURPS is around 75% old school, and that is old school enough for me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.